She handed me the divorce papers while standing in my kitchen. Not my husband, my best friend. Jewel smiled like she was doing me a favor. Darren stood behind her, silent, relieved. Like this was the final step of a deal they'd already shaken on. I didn't scream, didn't beg, I just folded the paper and asked if they wanted tea. Where are you listening from today? Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated and came back stronger. They always said I was the calm one. Not ambitious, not loud, just steady. Maybe that's why no one questioned it when I quietly handed in my resignation from Eugene High School the day Mom forgot how to use the microwave. I had spent 16 years teaching literature, metaphor, allegory, the rhythm of grief. But nothing in those books prepared me for watching the woman who raised me hold her toothbrush upside down and cry. It started small. She misplaced keys, called the mailman by my father's name. Then one morning I found her folding her socks into sandwich bags. That's when I stopped teaching Macbeth and started timing her medications. Darren said he understood. At first, he even helped, brought flowers, made dinner. But care takes time, and time eats attention. Eventually, his help became silence. His silence became absence. And his absence became expectation. I became the unpaid nurse, the invisible wife, the live-in ghost. And Jules, she became our shadow. The kind that grows long at sunset when no one's looking directly at it. She'd visit with her perfect curls and candle gifts. Call Mom sweetheart, then pour herself the good wine. I don't know how you do it, she'd say, leaning on the kitchen island like she lived there. You're stronger than I could ever be. Funny how the people who say that never actually offer to carry anything. I should have seen it then, how her visits lengthened, how her perfume lingered long after she left. How Darren started using words like space and reset when he talked about us. But I was tired of watching Mom lose her vocabulary while I lost my voice. I didn't argue when Darren said we should consider renting the guest room. Didn't protest when Jules arrived with a yoga mat and 6 matching velvet bags. Just until I figured things out, she smiled. She figured it out quickly. Within weeks, she was hosting dinner in my kitchen, rearranging my spices, wearing my robe. She once handed Darren my coffee mug, the one that said "World's Okayest Teacher." They both laughed. I didn't. I just folded laundry and filed the moment away like a receipt I'd need later. People think betrayal is loud, but it rarely starts with screaming. It starts with tiny permissions you don't even realize you're granting. By the time you do, they've already moved in and hung a portrait over your silence. 3 weeks after Jules moved in, I noticed the password to our joint bank account had changed. I didn't ask right away, just waited. Darren brought it up over dinner, chicken piccata, candlelight, like he was easing into a breakup with our finances. Just tightening security, he said. Online frauds everywhere these days. I nodded, and the next morning I reactivated an old account of my own, one I'd opened 10 years ago under my maiden name, Naomi Blythe. He didn't remember the name, he never asked. That account was where all the payments had gone. Every royalty check, every licensing agreement, every wire from my publisher in Quebec. The ones I received under the pen name A.M. Blythe. He always said my drawings were cute. That writing kid stories was a sweet little hobby. He never asked where the money came from that paid for the new furnace, or why I always filed taxes separately. Because in his mind I didn't contribute. I let him think that. The first manuscript had been typed between caregiving shifts and insomnia. A story about a brown fox with mismatched socks who found magic in forgotten corners. It sold 2,000 copies the first year, then 20,000 the next. Then someone adapted it into a podcast. Then came the animation studio. By the time Darren started hiding passwords, I'd already bought a 2-bedroom townhouse in Bend, rented under Foxlight Rentals, LLC. He'd driven past it once on the way to a golf retreat, said cute spot. Too bad it's wasted on Airbnbs. I smiled, didn't correct him. You learn not to correct men like Darren, you just document. And when he borrowed $20,000 from our joint account to help Jules get her business off the ground, I didn't object. I just logged into my management dashboard and allocated that same amount toward a down payment on a lakeside cabin in Sisters. Newly renovated, fully booked, listed under an alias. I called the file Seated Silence. I printed copies of the deeds, tucked them between pages of one of my books, and went back to making tea folding towels and letting them both believe I was too tired to notice anything. They thought I was standing still, but I was building a runway. They threw a party to celebrate their fresh start, candles in mason jars, a handmade charcuterie board, name tags on the glasses tied with ribbon. It was the same house where I'd buried my mother's ashes under the lilac tree, the same porch where Darren proposed with trembling fingers and a ring I'd picked out myself. But tonight, the walls smelled of cinnamon and cheap triumph. Jules floated from room to room, greeting guests like a hostess on HGTV. "Welcome to our place," she cooed. Our place. She had never paid a cent of mortgage, didn't know the sink clogged every March, had never painted the hallway 3 times because the first 2 shades of white looked too cold. She just walked in and took ownership like entitlement was part of her skincare routine. I stepped in just before the toast. There was a hush, not from surprise, but from discomfort, as if everyone had been instructed not to mention me, but I'd refused to stay erased. Jules blinked like a cat caught mid-pounce. Darren's smile collapsed halfway. "Naomi," she said, voice breathy, "you didn't have to come." "I know," I said, and handed her a small square gift bag. She opened it cautiously. Inside, a single photo in a wooden frame. The house in 2003. No shutters, no pergola, just brick bare trees and me standing on the steps holding a sold sign. Pregnant. Darren paled. "I thought you'd like to remember what it looked like before you called it yours." A few people turned away. One woman let out a sharp exhale, like she couldn't decide if it was a laugh or a gasp. Jules smiled too brightly. "Oh, Naomi, you always did love nostalgia." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked through the living room, slowly tracing the edges with my eyes. The bookshelf I built from scratch, the window seat where I used to grade papers, the rug from my mother's collection now turned sideways. Nothing had been stolen outright, just repositioned, rebranded. Like they hadn't replaced me, just repackaged what I made. I passed Darren as I left. He didn't look at me, but I looked at his hand, still wearing the watch I gave him for our 10th anniversary, still ticking, still mine. They didn't stop me. No hugs, no protest, not even a thank you. Just silence, tense, afraid I might come back with more than a photograph. I smiled, walked out the door, and let it close behind me, not with a slam, but with the kind of click that sounds final. That night, I poured myself a glass of elderflower tonic and opened the security app on my tablet. The indoor cameras were still connected. They'd never changed the login. I hadn't watched the footage in months, didn't need to, until now. The screen flickered to life at 11:37 p.m. Jules was curled up on the couch, barefoot, swirling wine. Darren sat across from her, tapping something into his phone. The lights were dimmed. The same throw blanket I'd used during Mom's final winter was now wrapped around Jules's shoulders. "You think she's still spying on us?" Jules asked, half laughing. She looked like she wanted to haunt the walls. Darren scoffed. "She won't do anything. Naomi's not the type." "What type is that?" she asked, sipping. He shrugged. "The tired kind. The kind who stays too long, leaves too late, and forgives too easily." The wine in her hand stilled. Then she whispered something that made me pause the video. "Do you think she knows we use the joint account for the spa money?" He didn't reply, just kept scrolling. That silence said everything. I clipped the footage, downloaded it, labeled the file, observed weakness. Then I opened another tab and reviewed the lease agreement Darren had signed 7 months ago. He never read fine print. I always did. The house, technically owned by Blythe Holdings LLC, was not their house. It had been leased to them on a 12-month corporate contract under a clause I created myself. Section 9A, no subletting, no romantic co-tenancy without written approval. It was specific, it was legal, and now it was breached. They thought I had disappeared, that I'd left them with a gift they didn't have to unwrap carefully. But I'd built this house with clauses, with lines in ink, not just emotion. And tonight, while they toasted our future, I was scheduling an official termination of lease notice. Delivery 72-hour service. Recipient Jules Hathaway and Darren Ellery. Subject line, occupancy violation. Immediate action required. I clicked confirm and closed the tablet. The hallway behind me flickered in the low light, quiet, but not empty. This was still my story. They just hadn't read the last chapter yet. A week after the party, I received an envelope from Montreal. Cream paper, no logo. But I recognized the handwriting on the custom slip Lucian, my editor. Inside a royalty report, my second quarter earnings. There was a short note clipped to the front. Congratulations. France and South Korea just picked up foreign rights. We're nearing 1.1 YTD L. I folded the page in half, then in quarters, pressed it flat, and slid it into the folder labeled Proof. That made it official. Total assets, including my properties and licensing deals, $2.6 million. Clean, audited, untouched. Not once in 15 years had Darren asked what A.M. Blythe stood for. Not when he saw the name trending on Goodreads. Not when the books were turned into audiobooks, podcasts, cartoons. He just chuckled and said, another quirky pen name. Bet she drinks matcha and paints in barns. I don't drink matcha. And I wrote my first book in a laundry room next to a pile of mom's medication receipts. I'd kept my silence not out of fear, but for precision. Because the only thing more satisfying than speaking the truth is choosing when. I made 3 phone calls that afternoon. To my real estate attorney, authorizing a formal 72-hour eviction under Lease Clause 9A. To my tax advisor, transferring all Blythe Holdings assets into a trust in my name only. And to a notary public to prepare a letter of financial disclosure, not for court, not for Darren, but for legacy, for when someone asked me years from now, what did you do when they thought you were nothing? I wanted my answer to be filed, time-stamped, witnessed. That evening I received a text from Jules. Hey, Wood, can we talk justice? I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding. I didn't reply. I just archived it, like an overdue invoice from a business I no longer dealt with. Because some people don't deserve confrontation, only consequence. And I wasn't going to argue anymore. Not with people who never once looked me up, but thought they had me figured out. They'd Googled spa names, investment ideas, vacation packages, but they never once Googled me. Not Naomi Ellery, not Naomi Blythe, and certainly not A.M. Blythe. The name on every copyright, every contract, every dollar that was never theirs to claim. Let them sit in that house drinking wine they didn't buy under lights. I had paid for on furniture they thought was theirs. Because tomorrow the doorbell would ring, and everything they thought they'd built would come stamped with one line. In vacate premises, 72 hours. I didn't need a confrontation. I already had the signature. They called it a launch party. New beginnings. A fresh chapter for Jules' wellness brand. Co-sponsored by Darren's firm, held at the boutique art space downtown. When the invitation hit my inbox, I didn't open it, not at first. But then I saw the tagline in the subject line. Rooted in integrity, built on trust. I smiled. A week later, I walked through the gallery doors in a navy dress and low heels. No jewelry, no statement bag. Just a soft folder in hand, thin but dense, labeled Transfer of Ownership, enclosed. People glanced. Some did double takes. One woman clutched her Prosecco like it might spill if she blinked. Jules stood beneath a banner printed with her name in gold script. Darren was by the bar laughing with his boss. They looked comfortable. He spotted me first. Laughter stopped. Then his jaw tightened just slightly. Jules followed his line of sight, and her smile fell half an inch. She didn't greet me this time. I didn't need her to. I walked to the cake table, white fondant lavender trim, sculpted into the shape of a lotus. A little sign next to it read, "Growth comes from pain." I placed the folder beneath the cake platter, slid it just far enough in so that when someone lifted the dessert for photos, it would surface like a seedling in spring. Then I waited. A photographer passed me. Someone handed me a drink sparkling elderflower. I sipped. Jules stepped up to the mic, cleared her throat, talked about healing, about reclaiming your voice, about building from scratch. She never looked in my direction until the very end. "I want to thank the people who made this possible," she said, "and especially Darren for believing in this dream even when others didn't." Applause. I set my glass down. Then the hostess wheeled the cake forward. Jules picked up the knife hand posed for the camera. "Let's begin," she said. And when she lifted the cake, the silver folder slid forward like gravity had been waiting for this moment. The gold sticker seal caught the light. Jules blinked, then picked it up. Her fingers shook as she read the title page. Notice of termination. Blythe Holdings LLC. Lease ID, Euro 1758. 72-hour action required. Darren stepped closer, reading over her shoulder. His face paled. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Someone near the front whispered, "Wait, are they getting evicted?" Another voice louder, "Isn't that Naomi's company name?" Jules looked up, eyes scanning the crowd for an exit, or a hole to fall into. There was none. Jules stepped back from the mic like it had burned her. She held the folder awkwardly open, trembling, as if trying to decide whether to hide it or deny it. Darren reached for the document. His fingers barely grazed the paper before I spoke. "Don't," I said calmly from where I stood beside the drinks table. Just one word, but the room went silent. I stepped forward, not rushed, not dramatic, just present finally, fully. "My name," I said, turning toward the crowd, "is Naomi Ellery, but some of you may know me better as A.M. Blythe." A few gasps, one audible, "Wait, what?" I turned to Jules. "That lease signed by both of you was never a gift. It was a contract. And you violated it the moment you called what was leased yours." Then to Darren, "You said I was too tired, too soft, that I didn't understand money or timing. But timing, Darren," I tapped the watch on his wrist, "has always been my strength." He tried to speak. I held up one hand, not in anger, just finality. 3 properties, 2 licensing deals, an animation contract and post-production. I turned to the audience, the investors, the wellness clients, the PR reps with their iPads open. "I'm the sole owner of Blythe Holdings. And as of this morning, this couple has 72 hours to vacate the property they've marketed as their own." Gasps, murmurs. Someone dropped a fork on the tiled floor. Jules looked like she might faint, a fragile statue wrapped in gauze and borrowed language. Darren looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the air he used to fill every room with. I didn't raise my voice, didn't call them names, didn't cry. I simply stepped forward, picked up the cake knife, not to cut, but to gently scrape the little plaque from the fondant base. "Growth comes from pain." I said it in front of them, then looked down at the cake. "I didn't come here for revenge," I said. "I came to reclaim what was already mine." Then I turned. No applause, no music. Just the sound of air being sucked from a room full of people who finally saw clearly. I walked to the exit, past the table where their new branding brochures sat in neat stacks, slipped one into my bag just to remember what delusion looks like when it's printed in gloss. And as I stepped out into the spring air, cool and unsentimental, I didn't feel lighter. I felt accurate. I wasn't starting over. I was closing the loop. I moved out of Eugene quietly. No big announcement, no farewell dinner. Just 1 truck, 2 plants, and 37 boxes labeled in my own handwriting. The cabin and sisters had been rented for months, but I kept one weekend open. For myself, no reception, no press, no Darren, no Jules. Just wind, and a pine needle silence that didn't ask me to explain anything. I unpacked slowly, mug by mug, page by page. There was a shelf by the window, raw wood still smelling like sap, and I placed one book on it first, The Fox Who Stayed Quiet. The first one I ever wrote, the one Darren once said was sweet, but not marketable, the one I wrote while Mom slept in the next room in the moments between grief and grit. I stared at the cover, not out of pride, out of recognition. That fox had no voice in the first half of the book. She watched the forest fall apart, watched other animals lie still, build nests from someone else's feathers. But she never roared, she just remembered and rebuilt. That was the power of staying silent, long enough to finish the story. I lit a candle, opened the window, let the scent of pine and ink settle into the cabin's ribs. The next day, I received a text from Darren. One line, "Can I at least get my parents' wedding album?" I stared at it for a full minute, then forwarded it to my attorney, because once you give someone permission to treat your value as disposable, you lose nothing by never replying again. Jules never texted, not after the party, not after the lease expired, not even after the property listing went live with a price that made her old spa look like a lemonade stand. But I heard from others. People always talk when you leave the stage standing tall. She's couch hopping in Ashland. He's working freelance again, no firm wants the PR risk. I think they split. I didn't smile. I didn't need to, because closure doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes it just looks like silence that no longer weighs anything. And this silence fit perfectly on my shelf. 3 months passed. No more letters, no headlines, just pages, lots of them. I wrote again, not out of rage, not for money, just because the silence in me had finally cleared space for something else. The fox in my new manuscript didn't run anymore. She stayed, planted things, built homes no one could steal. I sent the draft to Lucian. He replied within a day, "This is your strongest work yet, maybe because you wrote it free." Then one morning I opened the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a card, no handwriting, just a printout. "And thank you for keeping my room the way it was." And beneath that a signature I hadn't seen in years. Chloe Ellery, Darren's daughter, my stepdaughter. She'd been 16 when I married her father, resentful, sharp-tongued, always loyal to her mother and rightfully so. We'd never had a falling out, but we never had a real bond either. After the divorce, she disappeared from both our lives. I didn't try to chase her, but I also never touched her room. The lilac sheets, the sketchbook with wolves and sci-fi ships, the book I gave her once to kill a mockingbird still on the nightstand. I never expected anything in return. And yet here it was a small note that said, "You were never invisible, I just didn't know how to look." I folded it carefully, placed it on the second shelf, right beside my royalty statements, and the old Valentine card Mom wrote me in shaky cursive before she forgot who I was. I didn't cry, not even then, because healing isn't a moment, it's a pattern. It's choosing quiet after they've screamed you into silence. It's stacking shelf after shelf with proof that you kept going even when no one clapped. I walked out to the porch, coffee and hand air crisp with pine and faraway thunder. No one knew I lived here. No one asked anymore if I was okay. And I liked it that way. Because this time, no one had to see me for me to know I'd won. I didn't reclaim my worth. I just stopped letting them borrow it.